Greetings, Honey Badgers. Jonathan Levy here from Bitcoin Academy, and today we have a very special treat for you because I am joined by Peter Van Valkenburgh. He is the Director of Research at CoinCenter, which is a nonprofit think tank focused on educating and informing regulators and the population about cryptocurrency and making sure that legislation is being passed to enable and push this technology forward to the entire world. I got a chance to meet up with Peter when he was here in Israel during one of the many cryptocurrency conferences that have been going on, and we agreed that we definitely had to meet up and do an interview online so that we could bring you guys just an update and some information about a lot of different and interesting topics. So Peter and I talk about regulation of blockchain and cryptocurrency. We talk about where governments are standing right now. We talk about ICOs and what the future holds for them. And of course, we just talk about, well, really everything from taxation to money laundering and so much more. If you're someone who's interested in getting involved in Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general, you definitely need to watch this lecture because it's going to inform you on the legal repercussions and cautionary tales of things you need to know that are involved in this scene. So without any further ado, I want to present to you my new friend, Mr. Peter Van Valkenburgh of CoinCenter. Peter, welcome, and thank you so much for making the time to speak. I know we've been trying to connect ever since we met here in Israel at the blockchain conference. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Awesome. So Peter, for those who haven't had the pleasure to kind of hear you lecture, we see a little bit of the CoinCenter lecture in the back, or sign in the back, but let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do and kind of how you got involved with Bitcoin and blockchain.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Research at CoinCenter, and CoinCenter is Washington, D.C. based. We're a think tank, basically. We're a nonprofit that's independent, so we're not a trade association. We are dedicated to a pretty clear mission, which is just to educate and advocate to policymakers, to government, about Bitcoin and open blockchain networks like Ethereum and Zcash and the like. We were started in around 2014 and have been operating now for 3 years. We do three things. We do education, policy research, and advocacy. Education's where we spent most of our first few years operating. Basically, if there's somebody in government, in Washington, D.C., in the state governments here in the U.S., or sometimes abroad, who has a question about how Bitcoin works or how Ethereum works or how these technologies work and why do they have advantages or why should we be excited about them, we'll come and we'll give a briefing to them. We do one-to-one briefings, one-to-many briefings. We've testified before Congress. We've spoken at gatherings at the major federal agencies that might regulate this technology or might not. We also publish a series of plain English backgrounders on our website, coincenter.org, that are just 2,000-word explainers of, say, a discrete topic in the space, like how private or anonymous is Bitcoin really? And the answer is not that private or anonymous. And here's the blockchain, et cetera, et cetera. So aside from education, I said we do policy research and advocacy. Those are when we're having a conversation with a policymaker or someone in government, and there's a question that we don't have a clear answer to. It's not usually because it's a question about the technology, because we can always find someone from the space to come and brief them about a deep question about the technology. But sometimes there's a question that doesn't have an answer because it's a question of how the law intersects with the technology in a way that nobody previously saw or understood or had a particular opinion about. So it leaves this gap where you say, okay, well, we enforce laws like this with traditional technologies. How do we do that with this new technology? Is it possible? Is it desirable? The easiest way to explain that is to give a quick example. So, for example, money transmission is regulated in the U.S., and it's also regulated in the European Union and elsewhere. And it's regulated for a couple different purposes, but one of them is we worry about people who hold people's money. We worry that they'll run off with it, or they'll steal it, or they'll get hacked, or whatever. And so in the U.S. at the state level, we've traditionally had every state give out licenses to people who are doing money transmission. And if you don't get a license from the state, you're not supposed to do money transmission. So policy research for this technology comes in where the question is asked, all right, well, is running a Bitcoin business money transmission? And the answer varies state by state. And then the policy prescriptions we make vary depending on the technology. So we might argue that it makes sense or it's logical to regulate a company like Coinbase the same way companies like PayPal or Venmo are regulated. Otherwise, it'd be advocating for special treatment, which maybe we want to do, but it's a harder argument to make. But it doesn't make sense at all to regulate a Bitcoin miner as a money transmitter. Because unlike PayPal or Venmo, they can't walk away with the funds. They don't hold funds for people. They're simply validating, elliptical curve signatures and putting transactions in blocks, which is very different and not the kind of activity we'd want a license to be required to perform. Right. And the same is true of writing a software wallet. So something like what blockchain.info does. And it gets a little, hard to explain to a regulator when you say, look, blockchain.info looks exactly like Coinbase to you. We know. Yeah. But the code is running. It's client-side JavaScript. It's all on my machine, and I have the keys, not them. Right. That takes a lot of explaining, and then it also takes a lot of legal interpretation to get them comfortable with the idea that you would regulate a Coinbase as a money transmitter, but not a blockchain.info. Then it gets even more complicated with multi-sig and things like that,
which are kind of these new technologies where for the first time, it's like no one, if someone loses a multi-sig key, there's no legal framework that's going to force someone to give it up, or force the bank to open access to the account.
Right. And you bring up an interesting point. The right framework for those kinds of systems, I think, is contract law, because contract law is flexible. So what did the two parties who entered into the agreement actually agree to?
Right. Which is actually a really good segue. You're originally a lawyer by education. I mean, kind of blockchain is your secondary career, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. So I went to New York University's law school. When I was there, I made up my mind really early. I never wanted to work at a big soulless law firm. No offense to all my friends who work at big soulless law firms, but I thought I wanted to do advocacy in Washington, D.C., and at the time I was thinking it would probably be about privacy and copyright, because those are hot button issues for how the internet's disrupting legal expectations and policy expectations. The Snowden revelations were around this time. And so I came to D.C. on a Google Policy Fellowship to work on those issues. And Jerry Brito, CoinCenter's executive director, found me not long after and said, hey, do you want to come and be the director of research at a Bitcoin think tank? And I said, that's awesome. Oh, yeah. No such thing exists. And he's like, we're going to build it. And I'm like, this is good.
That's awesome. So, okay, yeah. I have so many questions, Peter, and our time is limited, so I'm going to try and pick the best ones here. The first one is, the media being what it is, and we could do a whole podcast about media representation of Bitcoin, but media being what it is, the hottest headlines that people who are new to this ecosystem are seeing are China's banning Bitcoin, and this senator is voting to ban Bitcoin. So I guess before we get into whether or not that's actually possible from a legal perspective, what's the status in the world right now? Which countries are frowning upon cryptocurrencies and which countries are enthusiastically supporting them? I know, obviously, your expertise is focused in Washington, D.C., but...
Yeah, so we are mostly U.S. based, and, I'll say the U.S. response has been, I think, very good, actually. A lot of people like to be down on U.S. Bitcoin policy. There's complicated things like the state-by-state money transmission issue, but that's not complicated because people in government hate Bitcoin. It's complicated because we have 50 states and they all have jurisdiction over licensing, and it's bad for PayPal and Venmo just like it's bad for Bitcoin. In fact, we're working on hopefully releasing a report soon that'll talk about why state-by-state money transmission just doesn't make sense in the modern internet age. And what we'd be trying to do with that paper, saying it's not just about cryptocurrency. It'd be great for cryptocurrency if we could get rid of the state-by-state system. But it's something that Google and Amazon should and really are starting to care about as well, because they have businesses where they might do payments and that kind of thing. So the U.S. response is sort of benign. Generally speaking, it's just difficult to fit these things into all the existing regulatory baskets. And there are a lot of regulatory baskets. Besides the 50 states, there's maybe 7 or 8 federal agencies that all potentially have some jurisdiction over some activities that people might do using tokens. So the SEC, for example, might regulate somebody selling tokens because it's a security. The Treasury might regulate exchanges because they want them to do know your customer and anti-money laundering compliance. And so there's all these different things. Globally, the countries that have been a little bit more welcoming are more welcoming, I think, because they have simpler systems. So in the UK, for example, you have really just one regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, which is associated with Her Majesty's Treasury. And so if you want to do something, whether it's sell tokens in an initial coin offering or run an exchange or just be a miner, and you have questions whether you're going to be regulated, you only have to get one answer from one regulator, the FCA. You don't have to go by state and agency by agency like in the US. And then for just a general tapestry, just to give a characterization of the global landscape, the US is sort of first out of the gate, so we have somewhat stricter requirements from a regulatory standpoint, like we're already regulating exchanges for anti-money laundering stuff. The European Union is right there right now with the 4th anti-money laundering directive, where they're going to incorporate regulating like Bitcoin exchanges as businesses that need to do anti-money laundering compliance. You can look at that as friendly or unfriendly. It's costly for exchanges to comply with those requirements, but at the same time, it might make institutional investors more comfortable using the technology. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another, As far as countries that have been more overtly hostile, there's the countries that we're talking about, like a decentralized government like the US, where you have too many people in power and no like central authority to organize and rationalize it all. And then the FCA, where you have like one regulator, and that's great. The other end of the spectrum is, of course, China or Russia, where you have single-party states and the ability to shape policy rapidly and aggressively. And there, I think you've seen both the hottest and the coldest reactions to these technologies. Right. Kind of, if you read, and we're U.S.-based and don't focus on Chinese policy at all. It's a black box to us. But if you look, at the headlines week after week, it's like, now it's banned, now it's okay, now it's banned. Right. The one thing they need to do is ban mining, which tells you something, I think. The Chinese are quite wise when it comes to accumulating wealth as a global player, and Bitcoin's one of the things they're accumulating.
Right, and bringing in, boosting economies of underdeveloped areas which have these massive hydroelectric plants, and the only game in town, the only people providing employment in those areas is these huge mining operations.
That's right, and that equipment would just be sitting fallow and unused because it was built to power cities that didn't yet get settled. The energy problem, so-called problem, is one thing we want to write a backgrounder on right now. We have these plain English explainers. A lot of people say like, oh, well, Bitcoin's so bad for the environment. And my answer is most Bitcoin is mined by green energy, I think. Right. I would need to have that confirmed. But the Chinese hydroelectric powered mining facilities are a good example of that. That stuff's just sitting there unused. And people also don't seem to understand, a lot of people, that electricity doesn't travel globally. Right. Like, you have so much loss when you go just 100 miles or 500 miles. So it's sitting there.
Yeah. Well, that, and also I think the pressure, Bitcoin mining is now taking up, I saw a headline, which I didn't fact check, so, could be fake news, but it is taking up more electricity than some nation states. And if you ask me, that pressure to drive down electricity pricing can only do one thing, which is create a market for cheap renewable energy, such as solar, such as wind, because never before, if you think about manufacturing, electricity is such a small part of their cost, for someone like a Foxconn or a Samsung. But for Bitcoin mining, they're all about, and they will move to somewhere like Iceland with geothermal solely based on the price of electricity. Man, the difference in 2 pennies per kilowatt hour is...
I've been to Iceland. It's also lovely. They have very warm people.
Warm people, especially with all the Bitcoin mining. All right, that's all we have time for today in this YouTube version of the video, but I want to let you guys know that there is actually a much longer 45-minute uncut interview with Peter that is included as part of the Bitcoin Academy Masterclass. And you guys are actually invited to check out a completely free trial of that course. And all you have to do is just hit the link below. There's no credit card required. And it's an incredible course. 8+ hours, I think now 9 hours of content that will take you from absolutely complete beginner to Bitcoin master in, well, matter of hours. So go ahead and check that out, guys. Free trial. And otherwise, other things I invite you guys to do: subscribe, like, share this video. You'll be seeing some buttons right now. I'm not sure, are they here? Are they there? But hit that subscribe button, and we're coming out with tons of great new videos free for you guys every single week. So we look forward, and thank you guys for the comments below. Take care.